"You ruined us, Dad," screamed outside the courthouse. I held up a 2015 scholarship letter to the judge, a full ride offer in my name. My parents instantly went pale. "My name is Noah, I'm 28, and my own parents sued me, claiming I stole their non-existent retirement fund." Before I reveal how a single, forgotten online post from a decade ago completely shattered their case in court, please tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I'm curious to see how far this story travels. It all started after a major software upgrade at work. The office buzzed with a collective sense of relief and accomplishment. For the first time in weeks, I left before sunset. As a senior software engineer, I loved the clean, logical world of code. You type a command, it runs. There are rules. There's order, a stark contrast to the chaos about to erupt in my life. Driving home, I felt a deep, satisfying sense of achievement, a feeling I'd pursued for 10 years. That morning, I'd made the final mortgage payment, officially owning my first apartment, free and clear, years ahead of schedule. It wasn't a mansion, just a one-bedroom condo in a nice part of town, but it was my sanctuary. Every brick, every window, a testament to years of ramen noodles, skipped vacations, and an unwavering focus on one goal: complete financial and emotional freedom. I stepped into my apartment, the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings still lingering. I dropped my keys into a ceramic bowl by the door, a small but significant gesture. This was my bowl, in my home. I grinned, looking around at the minimal furniture and unpacked boxes. I'd made it. That evening, I had a quiet celebration. Just me, a large pepperoni pizza steaming in its box, and a cold drink. I was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, scrolling through my phone when the building intercom buzzed. A mail carrier had a certified letter for me to sign for. I figured it was the final deed from the county. More paperwork for the pile. I jogged downstairs, signed the electronic pad with a flourish, and carried the stiff, official-looking envelope back upstairs. In my apartment, I tore it open with my thumb. The letterhead was from Willix, Crane and Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of. My brow furrowed. I didn't know anyone named Willix or Crane. Then I saw the first line, "On behalf of our clients, Martin and Victoria Smith." The pizza in my stomach turned to lead. My parents. Why were they using a law firm to contact me? My eyes scanned the paper, the legal jargon swirling, but certain phrases stood out, harsh and ugly: breach of verbal agreement, unjust enrichment, immediate repayment of parent plus student loans borrowed for your educational purposes. My heart began to pound erratically against my ribs. I forced myself to keep reading. My breath hitched. The letter meticulously itemized loan disbursements for every semester I was in college, including fall 2015, spring 2016, and more. The total at the bottom of the page seemed impossible. $154,212, plus accrued interest calculation. I reread the number, thinking my eyes were deceiving me. Oh, it couldn't be right. It was a sum large enough to consume my entire life, swallow my savings, even this apartment. But the final words broke me. It wasn't a request. It was a cold, deliberate threat. Failure to negotiate a payment plan within 30 days will result in legal action to collect assets such as property liens and wage garnishments. Wage garnishment, liens on property. They were coming for my home, the one I'd just paid off. They were coming for my salary, which I'd worked so hard to earn. I leaned back against the wall, the letter trembling in my hand. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a misunderstanding. The formality, the legal wording, the 30-day deadline, this was a declaration of war. My own parents, who were supposed to be my staunchest allies, had just aimed a financial bazooka at my head and threatened to pull the trigger. I sat there for what felt like hours. The pizza grew cold, the drink warmed. The silence of my new, empty home was no longer peaceful. It was oppressive, dominated by one screaming question: why? To grasp the sheer, earth-shattering shock of that letter, I first need to understand the story my parents had woven for me, a story I'd blindly accepted for 10 years. It was a tale of their sacrifice, my compromise, and our shared effort. It was also a complete lie. Let's rewind a decade. I was 18, and my entire life revolved around one shimmering dream: Stanford University. It wasn't just about prestige. I'd devoured information about their engineering program, their professors, their culture of innovation. It felt like my mecca. I poured every ounce of myself into my application. I sacrificed weekends for SAT prep, skipped parties for AP assignments, and wrote my essay from the heart. I remember when the acceptance letter arrived. The envelope was thick and weighty, a good omen. My hand shook as I ripped it open in the driveway. The first word I saw was "Congratulations." A burst of pure, unadulterated joy escaped my throat. I ran inside, waving the letter like a victory flag. I got in. Mom, Dad, I got in. Stanford. Their reaction was muted. It was the first red flag, but I was too high on adrenaline to notice. My mother, Victoria, was arranging flowers on the coffee table. She looked up with a tight, forced smile. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful." My father, Martin, was paying bills at his desk in the corner. He removed his reading glasses and stroked the bridge of his nose, a gesture I later learned signaled anxiety or calculation. "Well, son," he said, his voice thick, "that's a hell of an accomplishment, but we need to be realistic." "The letter mentions a generous financial aid package," I added, my excitement turning to confusion. "They're offering a big scholarship." They sat me down at the kitchen table for what they called a dose of reality. My father pulled out a yellow legal pad and a calculator. "Okay, let's break this down," he said. He started listing numbers. Tuition, then added room and board, health insurance, holiday travel expenses. He inflated every possible cost, creating a terrifying mountain of expenses. "Look, Noah," my mother said, placing her hand on mine. Her hand was calm and kind, but her words cut like a knife. "The scholarship is wonderful, a real honor, but it's a partial scholarship. It covers a good chunk, but there's still a huge gap, a gap we simply can't afford." Looked at the numbers on the legal pad. They seemed unreasonably high. "But are you sure?" I asked. "Maybe we can get loans." "We don't want to saddle you with that kind of debt, honey," my father responded, shaking his head with paternal wisdom. "It would follow you for decades, and we can't co-sign. Our credit isn't good enough for a loan that big." Another lie. "The state university here," he said, tapping his pen on the table, "is an excellent engineering school. You can live at home. We can help you out, handle the paperwork, maybe take out a few small, manageable loans in our name to make it easier. We'll be a team. We'll get you through it." I felt the dream die right there at the kitchen table. It was a quiet, agonizing death. I wasn't just disappointed, I felt humiliated. I felt like a failure. I'd gotten into the best school, but I hadn't done well enough to get a full ride. I'd put my parents in an embarrassing, stressful situation. I was a burden. "Okay," I mumbled, my gaze fixed on the table. "Okay, the state school is fine." Believe them. I was 18. They were my parents. The second act of their play began later. My older brother Blake was a good guy, but not academically inclined. He cruised through high school with B's and C's. My parents called a family meeting one night, their faces beaming. "We have amazing news," my mother announced. "Blake has been accepted to a prestigious private university on the East Coast." I was stunned. "Wait, what?" "I thought we couldn't afford expensive schools." My father puffed out his chest. "Well, your mother and I have been doing some creative financial planning. We've decided to make a significant investment in Blake's future. It's going to mean a lot of sacrifice for us. We'll have to put off retirement, maybe downsize the house later, but he deserves the best possible start." The hypocrisy was staggering. They could afford a full-fledged private school for him, but my Stanford dream was an unattainable luxury. I looked at Blake. He was staring at his shoes, a slight flush on his cheek. He knew. Even then, he sensed something was wrong, but he said nothing. He accepted the gift, built on the ashes of my dream. The next few years were a grind. I enrolled at the local state university. To save money, I stayed in my childhood bedroom. My life became a repetitive cycle of school, homework, and work. I got a job bussing tables at a greasy diner, the smell of old coffee and fried onions clinging to my clothes. On weekends, I worked at a warehouse, stocking heavy boxes until my muscles ached. I'd come home exhausted long after my parents were asleep and force myself to study for my engineering exams. Meanwhile, Blake would call and text. He'd complain about the cafeteria food. He'd tell me about his fraternity ski trip to Vermont. He'd share photos from spring break in Cancun. He was having the quintessential college experience thanks to my parents' enormous sacrifice. Every day I had to swallow the bitter pill of resentment, but I channeled it. I used it as fuel. I promised myself I would work so hard, achieve such success that I would never need anything from anyone again, and I did. I graduated at the top of my class. I landed a great job. I got one promotion, then another. Was frugal with my money, saving every penny. Buying the apartment was more than just a financial transaction. It was a declaration of independence. It was the finish line of a long marathon. Now, with that terrifying letter, the marathon felt like a sham. The finish line had been the starting gun for a new, more terrifying race. I needed an ally. I needed a professional. I called Rachel. We'd been friends in college, part of a small, tight-knit study group for a tough thermodynamics class. She was brilliant, with a mind that could cut through nonsense like a laser. After graduation, she went to a prestigious law school. We hadn't spoken in a few years, lost in the shuffle of pursuing our careers, but I knew she was the one. Met at a small downtown coffee shop. I felt a rush of humiliation as I slid the letter from my parents' lawyer across the table. It felt like airing my family's dirty laundry. She read it, her demeanor shifting from warm inquiry to hard professional focus. She read it again, lips pursed. Parent plus loans, she finally said, lowering her voice. Nasty business. Legally, the debt belongs to the borrower, your parents. But they can, and often do, sue the student for repayment in civil court. Based on the idea of a verbal contract or unjust enrichment, it's your word against theirs. But there was no contract, I argued, my voice trembling. They told me they were helping. They called it a gift. Rachel leaned forward, her gaze locked on mine. Noah, parents don't just wake up one day and decide to sue their son for $150,000 out of the blue. Something else is going on here. Something is missing. She paused, then asked the question that would ignite the entire investigation. Let's go back to the beginning. You got into Stanford? Tell me everything you remember about that scholarship. And I mean everything. I recounted the whole sad story, the thick packet, my parents' unusually subdued reaction, the legal pad with the inflated numbers, and their insistence that it was only a partial scholarship. Rachel listened intently, her eyes never leaving my face. After I finished, she remained silent for a full minute, staring at the letter on the table. Then she looked up at me. Noah, she began, with precision and clarity, I'm going to ask you a very important question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Okay, I responded, my heart beginning to pound. Are you 100% certain it was a partial scholarship? Did you ever, with your own two eyes, see a document? A letter, an email from Stanford that explicitly stated the scholarship was partial? She leaned in closer. Or did you just take their word for it? The question hung in the air, thick and menacing. I opened my mouth to give the obvious answer. Of course I took their word for it. They're my parents. I think the words wouldn't come out. My father had taken the acceptance letter from my hand. He and my mother had read it together, heads bowed in conspiracy. I never got a good look at the financial aid section. I just accepted their summary and their verdict. A terrible wave of dread washed over me, as if my blood were freezing. It was the dizzying, nauseating feeling of realizing the ground you'd been standing on your entire life might not be solid. I mumbled, my voice barely audible. I don't know. I never checked. I just believed them. Rachel nodded slowly, her face stern. Then that, she said, tapping the letter from the lawyers, is not the real battle. This is a symptom. The real battle is discovering what they were hiding from you 10 years ago, and we need to find out now. The days following my meeting with Rachel were charged with a new, apprehensive energy. The cloud of shock and betrayal began to lift. Leaving behind the cold, sharp focus of a man on a mission, I was no longer just a victim. I was an investigator, and the subject of my inquiry was my own past. My first step was to follow Rachel's suggestion and become an archaeologist of my own history. I started with the state university I'd attended. I called the financial aid office again, this time with a more confident voice, and requested a detailed history of my student loan accounts. The administrator was helpful, promising to compile and send the records within a week. The next call was to Stanford, which I dreaded. It felt like reopening a wound that had never fully healed. My palm was sweating when I dialed the admissions office. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached a man in the scholarship awards department. I stated my case as clearly as possible, explaining I was involved in a legal dispute and needed official proof of a scholarship offer from spring 2015. The man, Mr. Henderson, was polite, but sounded weary. "Sir, that was a decade ago. Those records are in deep archive, and our privacy policies are very strict. I can't release that kind of information over the phone based on a verbal request." My hope dwindled. "Please," I pleaded, desperation seeping into my voice. "This is incredibly important. It's not just about money. It's about getting to the truth." The person on the other end sighed deeply. "Look," he replied, his voice softer, "I can't make any promises, but I'll see what I can dig up. If I find anything, I'll need a formal, written request from you or your legal counsel." "What was the name again?" I gave him my details and hung up, feeling like I'd thrown a message in a bottle into a vast, indifferent ocean. That evening, if on cue, my phone rang. The caller ID said, "Mom." My thumb hovered over the decline button, but morbid curiosity compelled me to answer. Her voice was like warm honey, a syrupy sweetness that set off alarms in my head. "Noah, darling, your father and I have been so worried. This whole business with the lawyers, it's just a terrible misunderstanding. They were far too aggressive. Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow? Just the 3 of us. We can sort this all out like a family." The part of me that remained, that 18-year-old boy craving their approval, wanted to say yes. It wanted the nightmare to be a simple misunderstanding. But Rachel's voice was a steel barrier in my mind. "They're not on your side. Every interaction is a calculation." "I don't think that's a good idea, Mom," I replied, my voice flat. "Don't be ridiculous," she chirped, her tone unwavering. "We love you, we miss you. Make your favorite pot roast." "Please, Noah. It would mean the world to your father." Against all my instincts, I agreed. I convinced myself it was a reconnaissance mission. I'd go, I'd listen, and I wouldn't give them an inch. I wanted to look them in the eyes and see if I could spot the liars hidden behind my parents' facade. The dinner was a bizarre piece of theater. The house smelled of my childhood, roast meat, and memories. My father remained mostly silent, playing the role of the stoic, wounded patriarch. My mother was the star of the show. She didn't explicitly mention the lawsuit. Instead, she took me on a curated tour of my own history, pulling out photo albums and pointing to pictures of a gap-toothed, smiling version of myself. "Look how happy we were," she exclaimed, her eyes welling up with perfectly timed tears. "I just want to get back to this. We're not getting any younger, Noah. Your father's retirement account took a huge hit in the last recession. We're scared." The pivot was smooth, practiced. She put her hand on mine. It felt cool. "We know how successful you are now, honey, and we are so incredibly proud. Just need a little help to see us through. A little support from the son we gave everything. 2, that's not too much to ask, is it?" It was a masterpiece of emotional blackmail. They were trying to bury me under an avalanche of guilt, believing that if I paid them, the feeling would stop. I sat there, pushing food around on my plate, my stomach a tight, painful knot. I saw the trap. I saw the puppeteers pulling the strings. I mumbled an excuse about an early meeting and hurried out the door, their sad eyes following me. When I got to my car, I called Rachel. It was a full-court press of guilt, I told her, gripping the steering wheel. "They're trying to wear me. Down, good, she said, her tone sharp. That's a desperation move. It means their legal position is weaker than they're letting on. Hold the line, Noah. We're waiting for our ammunition to arrive. A few days later, the first piece of ammunition arrived. A large envelope from the state university. With shaky hands, I opened it. Inside was a detailed statement of my student loan account. And there it was, in stark black and white. 4 years of Parent Plus loans, dispersed every semester, maxed out at the legal limit. The total was exactly what they had claimed. For a second, my heart sank. On paper, it was damning. I was about to call Rachel in a panic when I remembered her second piece of advice. I sat down at my computer and looked up the IRS rules for the American Opportunity Tax Credit for the years I was in school. The AOTC was a significant credit, providing up to $2,500 per year for eligible educational expenses. It's the crucial word, was expenses. You could only claim what you actually paid. This was the tricky part. I needed to get their tax returns. I contacted my father, my heart thumping. I pretended to be confused. Hey, Dad, my accountant is asking for some old records. He mentioned needing to know what educational credits were claimed when I was in school. Could you send me your tax returns from those years? Just for my records? There was a long pause. Why would you need that, Noah? He asked, his tone tinged. With skepticism, I don't know, Dad. It's just what the accountant said. Something about making sure I don't get in trouble with the IRS down the line. It's no big deal, right? I held my breath. He grumbled, but eventually agreed. Fine, I'll have your mother scan them. An hour later, they arrived in my inbox. I forwarded them directly to Rachel. Her call came less than 20 minutes later. Gotcha. She exclaimed, a triumphant smile in her voice. They claimed it every single year for the maximum amount. Noah, if they were paying with loan money, that's legal. But if that tuition was covered by a scholarship they knew about, they didn't just lie to you, they lied to the United States government. This is our leverage. This is big. It was a victory, but it felt sickening. I was building a case against my own parents for tax fraud. Each piece of evidence exposed another crack in the foundation of my world. The next day, the second shoe dropped. An email landed in my inbox. Subject line simply read, Stanford University follow-up. My breath caught. It was from Alan Carter, the current head of scholarship grants. He said he had located the archived file. Hi, Mr. Smith. Following up on your inquiry, I have identified the archived file with your admission and scholarship. Offer. Per your request, I've attached a legally certified and notarized affidavit for your use. The document verifies that you, Noah Smith, have been awarded the G.H. Redman Merit Scholarship. This was a full-ride award that covered all tuition, mandatory fees, room, and board for 4 undergraduate years. Our records show that the official notification for this award was sent via email to the primary address indicated on your application. VictoriaSmith88@mail.com. I hope this information is helpful. We wish you well in resolving your issue. Sincerely, Alan Carter. Stared at the screen, unable to process the words. Full ride scholarship. Your tuition, room, and board will be covered in full. My hand trembled as I clicked on the PDF attachment. There was an official document with the Stanford University seal laying out the truth in cold, undeniable legal language. They'd lied. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an exaggeration. It was a massive, life-altering deception. They had buried a golden ticket to a future I had earned through hard work and intellect. They had allowed me to spend years toiling, away, feeling like a second-class citizen, burdened by a failure that was never mine. They'd watched me struggle, knowing they held the key to my freedom in their inbox. And they did it so they could afford to send my brother to a prestigious school. And then, once their deception was complete, they had the audacity to sue me for the very money the scholarship had saved them. The despair I'd felt for months vanished. Bewilderment evaporated. In their place, an emotion I'd never felt before arose, pure, icy, diamond-hard rage. This was no longer about protecting my apartment or my income. This was about reclaiming a stolen past. This was about bringing justice to the 18-year-old they had betrayed. I picked up my phone. My hand was perfectly steady. "Rachel," I said when she answered. "I've got it. The smoking gun." There was a slight pause. "Good," she replied, her voice sharp and ready. "Now we stop defending. Now we attack." Armed with Stanford's affidavit, I felt a wave of righteous power. I envisioned walking into court, presenting the document, and watching my parents' case crumble to dust. The truth was on my side. Victory felt inevitable. But the legal system, as I quickly learned, isn't a truth machine. It's a grinder, and my parents' lawyer was excellent at feeding it garbage. Rachel filed the affidavit along with a motion to dismiss the lawsuit based on fraud and misrepresentation. We sat back, expecting the nightmare to end quickly. The letter we received back was a masterpiece of legal evasion. Their lawyer didn't question the affidavit's legitimacy. Instead, he crafted a new narrative around it. They claimed they had never received the email from Stanford, must have gone into their spam folder, a digital ghost in the system. They argued that, based on the reasonable assumption I only got a partial scholarship, they had a fiduciary duty as my parents too. Secure the loans as a safety net. They weren't lying, you see. They were simply responsible, loving parents preparing for the worst. They maintained that the stress and financial liability they incurred by signing those loans represented a type of assistance, for which I was morally and legally obligated to repay. It was bold, it was absurd, and it worked. The judge, a jaded man who had probably seen every type of family drama, denied our motion to dismiss. He ruled that the question of my parents' knowledge and intent was a factual issue that needed to be decided at trial. The news was devastating. The finish line I'd envisioned had vanished, leaving behind a long, dark, and expensive road. The confidence I'd felt was replaced by a growing, insidious fear. The case wasn't just ongoing, it was expanding. When my personal storm began, the stress led to a persistent, low-grade fever. It was the first thing I thought about when I woke up, and the last before I drifted into a fitful sleep. My work, once a haven of logic and order, became a battle. I'd stare at lines of code, but my mind was in a courtroom, picturing my mother on the stand. I started losing weight. My friends told me I looked exhausted and haunted. My apartment, once a symbol of independence, began to feel like a cage. The legal bills from Rachel's firm piled up on my coffee table, a constant reminder of how much this was costing me. I was spending my savings to protect myself against a lie. The irony was as bitter as poison. One night I hit my breaking point. I sat in the dark, staring at another bill, my gut tight with fear, and a dark, tempting thought crept into my mind. Just pay them. I could end it all. I could call their lawyer and propose a settlement. I could set up a payment plan.
What?
Defer a percentage of my salary for the next 20 years. It would be a surrender. It would mean their lies won. But the noise would stop. The legal bills would stop. The nagging, never-ending stress would finally cease. I could reclaim my life, albeit a diminished version of it. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Rachel's contact. I was about to call her. I was going to tell her to draft the settlement paperwork. I was going to surrender. My parents had pushed me to the edge, and I was ready to jump. A surge of deep self-loathing washed over me. They'd finally done it. As I sat there, buried in darkness and defeat, a random memory surfaced, like a flicker of light in the abyss. It was a memory of my mother from years ago. Not the loving mother from the photo albums, but the mother who would spend hours at night typing away on the home computer. She was obsessed with an online parenting forum called College Bound Parents. She had a username, a ridiculous, boastful nickname. And she would spend hours giving advice, sharing stories, and, as I later found out, bragging. A tiny thought, barely audible, sparked in my head. What if she bragged about it? It was a long shot, a digital Hail Mary. By now, the forum was probably a ghost town. The post would be lost in the digital ether. But there was something. Weak thread in a world of despair. My heart started beating a little faster. The call. 2. Rachel could wait. I rushed to my laptop and turned it on. My fingers, clumsy with a strange mix of hope and desperation, typed the forum's name into the search bar. There was still a digital remnant from a bygone internet era. I found the search option. I remembered her username, a cringe-worthy nickname. That was so uniquely her, ProudMom88. I typed it in and hit enter. The page returned an error. The search feature was broken. The archives were outdated or corrupted. The flicker of hope vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Of course, it was a stupid idea. I sat back in my chair, the darkness creeping back in, but then my engineer brain took over. If the front door is locked, try the back window. There had to be another way to access old web pages, the internet. Archive, the Wayback Machine. My fingers moved across the keyboard again. I typed the forum's URL. A calendar appeared, showing snapshots of the site captured over the years. I scrolled through the years, looking for the most relevant time frame. I selected a date and held my breath. The page loaded agonizingly slowly, like a dial-up era ghost. It was a snapshot of the forum from that specific day. I started scrolling, my eyes burning from the screen's glare, searching for that one username. Page by page, thread by thread. Parents worried about SAT scores. Parents disagreeing about dorm room essentials. It was an ocean of digital chatter. Hours passed. The clock on my screen ticked forward. My body ached. My eyes felt like sandpaper. I was about to give up, to drown in exhaustion and defeat. And then I saw it nestled in a subforum called College Admissions. The good, the bad, and the ugly. It was a thread. The discussion was titled, Dealing with an Unexpected Win. The username next to it, ProudMom88. My breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs. The world seemed to stop spinning. With shaky fingers, I clicked on the thread. The post was brief, only a few sentences. When I read those lines, the entire foundation of my parents' case crumbled. Their entire universe of lies was demolished. The atmosphere in the courtroom on the day of the trial was oppressive. The room was small, wood-paneled, and smelled of old paper and stale air conditioning. I sat next to Rachel, my suit feeling like a costume. My family had gathered across the aisle like a hostile delegation. My mother, Victoria, was dressed in a modest beige suit, radiating aggrieved motherhood. My father, Martin, sat ramrod straight with a stern expression. Behind them, my brother Blake looked pale and uneasy, avoiding my gaze. Their lawyer, Redmond, was a shark in a $1,000 suit. He spoke first, and his opening statement was, "A symphony of deception." He painted my parents as humble, hard-working individuals who had mortgaged their future for their children. He used terms like sacrifice, devotion, and the American dream. "These are good people," he said, his voice ringing with deceptive sincerity. "People who did everything for their son. And now that he is a successful engineer enjoying a six-figure salary made possible by their sacrifice, all they ask is that he honor his commitment, that he does the right thing." My mother delivered an Oscar-worthy performance on the witness stand. She wept softly as Redmond asked her a series of questions about their financial struggles. She spoke of sleepless nights, clipping coupons, and the crushing weight of the loans they took out for me. "We never wanted any of this," she said softly, blotting her eyes with a neatly folded tissue. "We just wanted him to acknowledge what we did. We gave him his future, and he's left us with nothing." It was devastatingly effective. I could feel the judge's sympathies shifting towards her. I felt my own case, my own reality, turn to sand and slip away. Then it was our turn. Rachel's approach was a dramatic contrast. She remained cool, precise, and surgical. She called me to the stand and asked me to recount my version of events, my Stanford dream, my parents' reality check at the kitchen table, and my 4 years grinding through public university while working 2 jobs. Redmond's cross-examination was designed to humiliate me. "Mr. Smith," he began, his tone condescending, "are you genuinely asking this court to believe that a man of your obvious intelligence, much less an engineer, never once bothered to independently verify the single most important financial offer of your young life? You simply accepted your parents' version of events?" "Yes," I replied, my voice clear and firm, staring directly at the judge, because they are my parents, and I trusted them. A very convenient form of trust, Redmond sneered before sitting down. Rachel approached the bench after I had stepped down. Your Honor, she began, capturing the room's attention. The plaintiff's entire case is built on claimed misunderstanding and faulty memory. They maintain they never saw the email and acted in good faith. We would now like to present facts that will leave no doubt that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a purposeful, planned, and documented deception. A large monitor facing the court and the witness stand came to life. Your Honor, Rachel continued, I am submitting a certified, time-stamped snapshot from the Internet Archive. Taken on April 28, 2015. The page is from a public online community called College-Bound Parents. I watched my mother's hand go to her pearls, her face drained of color. My father shot her a look of pure fury. The post in question is from a user with the handle ProudMom88, Rachel stated with a strong voice. Mrs. Smith, can you please confirm for the court that this was your username on that forum? My mother stared at her, silent. Her lawyer leaped to his feet. Objection. Relevance. This is a fishing expedition. It is the most relevant piece of evidence in this entire case, Your Honor, Rachel countered. It goes directly to the plaintiffs. Knowledge and intent? Overruled, the judge said, his gaze narrowing and focusing. On my mother. Mrs. Smith answered the question. My mother swallowed, her throat straining. I may have used that name on a few websites, she stammered. Thank you, Rachel said, a sad smile on her lips. Would the court clerk please read? The highlighted post from user ProudMom88 aloud. Profound calm descended over the courtroom. Clerk adjusted her glasses and began to read, her voice clear and emotionless. Unbelievable. My oldest has to struggle with loans to get into a good school, but my youngest just got a full free ride to California. He doesn't even know yet. Sometimes a parent has to make the tough calls for the good of the whole family. A collective gasp echoed across the gallery, and Redmond stood motionless, his mouth slightly agape. My father looked at my mother with such absolute betrayal that it was almost frightening. He had been part of the deception, but it was clear he had no idea she had been so foolish as to document it. But Rachel wasn't done. She waited for the words to sink in before delivering. The fatal blow. So, Mrs. Smith, she added quietly but clearly, it appears you knew. You knew it was a full free ride, and you made a difficult decision to withhold that life-changing opportunity from your own son, leading him to believe he had failed, and then suing him a decade later for money you never had to spend. Was this? Correct. My mother just stared, her face a collapsing ruin. The judge had had enough, and looked down from his seat, his face filled with cold disgust. Mrs. Smith, he said, his voice dangerously low. Do you have anything to say in response to this revelation? Before she could answer, the last pitiful piece of their conspiracy broke apart. My brother Blake, who had been shrinking in his seat, suddenly leaped to his feet. His face was blotchy, his eyes wild with terror, and he wasn't looking at me, but at our parents. I told you it was a crazy idea, he yelled, his voice cracking with a decade of pent-up guilt and cowardice. I warned you it would blow up in our faces. I never asked for any of this. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession, an acknowledgement that he knew he had been a quiet accomplice to their crime for his own gain. The trial was over. The truth had been detonated, not merely revealed, and my entire family had suffered as a result. The judge's gavel fell with a sharp final crack that mirrored the disintegration of my family. He did more than just reject my parents' lawsuit. He openly demolished it piece by piece. This court has witnessed a shocking and malicious campaign of financial and emotional fraud perpetrated by parents against their own child, he said, his voice cold and angry, far more chilling than shouting. He looked down from his bench, his eyes sweeping over my parents, who seemed to shrink in their chairs. The claim is dismissed with prejudice, he stated, meaning they could never try to bring this action again. This court will not be used as a weapon for family extortion. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in before delivering the blow that would change everything. Furthermore, he said with a sterner voice, based on the clear evidence of misrepresentation, the defendant's testimony, the plaintiff's own documented admissions of deception, I am referring this entire matter to the Internal Revenue Service for an investigation into tax fraud, and to the District Attorney's Office for a review of potential criminal charges, including conspiracy and perjury. My mother made a small coughing sound, and my father, who had maintained a tough facade throughout, suddenly cracked. He slumped in his chair, his face ashen, as if he had just watched his entire world burn to the ground. But they hadn't simply lost a case. They'd invited the full, crushing weight of the federal and state governments into their lives, and their greed had become a self-destruct sequence. As the judge adjourned the court, a strange numbness washed over me. I'd won. The truth had prevailed. But there was no elation, no triumphant fist pump, just a vast, hollow silence where my family had once been. Rachel placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Noah," she whispered softly. "You faced them down, and you won." I could only nod. The words stayed in my throat. We gathered our paperwork and walked out into the long, sterile courthouse hallway. And there they were, waiting for a broken, hostile scene. My father was the first to speak, his voice a whisper. "You've ruined us," he muttered, his eyes blazing with hatred. "Are you happy now? You've dragged your own family through the mud and destroyed everything." My mother stood behind him, her face contorted into a mask of pure malice. The sweet maternal facade was gone, replaced by the ugly truth underneath. "We gave you life," she moaned. "We sacrificed everything for you, and you repay us with this betrayal. You are no son of mine." For years, such comments would have been a death blow, sending me into a downward spiral of remorse, desperately trying to fix what I'd broken and pleading for their forgiveness. But something inside me shifted at that moment. The part of me that craved their approval and feared their displeasure had died in that courtroom, placed with a quiet, unwavering certainty. I looked at my father, the weak man who enabled a monster, at my brother, the coward who profited from her cruelty, and at my mother, the mastermind behind it all. "You have it backward," I said, my voice unusually calm and steady. "I didn't destroy this family. You did." I looked straight into my mother's eyes. "You ruined it in our kitchen 10 years ago when you decided my future was a commodity to be bargained over. You ruined everything each time you lied to me. You always made me feel inadequate while concealing the truth." I took a deep breath, and the words I'd been meaning to speak for 10 years finally came out. "My achievement isn't your retirement plan. My successes are not for you to claim. And my life," I said, my voice dropping slightly, "is not yours to dictate. I loved the people I thought you were," I said, my words tasting like ash, "but they never really existed. I'm done trying to win the approval of ghosts." I held their gaze for a moment longer. Then I turned my back. I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing left to say. I walked down the long hallway, past the security guards and metal detectors, to the large glass doors that opened to the outside world. Each step was a release. I was walking away from the lies, the manipulation, the guilt, and 1,000 invisible strings that had been used to control me. I pulled open the doors and stepped out into the glaring, indifferent sunlight. And for the first time in my life, I experienced the profound, terrifying, and exhilarating lightness of complete and utter freedom. The months following the trial were marked by calm, careful reconstruction rather than celebration. You don't just walk away from a building collapse unharmed. You have to sift through the wreckage, tend to your wounds, and then gradually and cautiously begin building something new. My first step towards reconstruction was selling the apartment. It was a beautiful place and my first major accomplishment. But it was tainted. The walls held too many memories of restless nights, pacing the floor with a phone to my ear, staring at stacks of legal documents representing my family's betrayal. It was no longer a home. It was the scene of the crime. I took a promotion at work that included a relocation package, a new city a few states away, with no one knowing my name or story. What's the perfect fresh start? About a smaller condo that didn't shout, "I made it," but rather whispered, "I'm safe." It became my refuge. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. My work was engaging. My coworkers admired me for my abilities, not for my background. I explored my new city, discovering a favorite coffee shop and a nice hiking trail. I was building a life, not just a career. One of the most surprising outcomes of the struggle was an invitation to speak at a small local TEDx event. A writer who covered local tech topics had written an article on my case, focusing on how I use the internet. Archive is a digital forensics tool to win, rather than the family drama. After reading the piece, the event organizer contacted us. The theme of their event was redefining value. If they asked me to speak, I was afraid. But Rachel convinced me otherwise. Your story isn't just about you, Noah, she explained. It's for everyone who has ever been made to feel small. For everyone who has ever had their worth questioned by the people who were supposed to build them up. So I agreed. I stood on that small platform beneath the bright lights, my heart pounding as I shared my story. I didn't focus on the rage or the legal maneuvering. I talked about the invisible price tags some families place on their children. I talked about the courage it takes to write your own story. When I finished, the audience erupted in applause. Afterward, person after person approached me, not to offer sympathy, but to tell their own stories. I realized that my pain, which had once been a source of shame, had transformed into a way to connect with people. I stayed in touch with Rachel, of course. She had become more than just my lawyer. She was the most loyal friend I had. She gave me the occasional grim update. The IRS investigation had been, in her words, a financial colonoscopy. My parents were forced to repay 10 years of bogus tax credits, along with heavy penalties and interest. It wiped out their meager savings. They had to sell the family house. Where I grew up and moved to a small rental apartment, their social circle, which was based on a veneer of middle-class respectability, dissolved once the trial became local news. Blake, my golden boy brother, had his own reckoning. His prominent firm had a zero-tolerance ethical policy, being named in a fraud and perjury inquiry. Even as a witness who admitted his involvement on the stand made him radioactive, he was quietly fired. My parents had stolen his expensive education, but it had led him nowhere. I assumed that was the end of it. I believed the narrative had concluded. I was healing. I was moving on. I'd even adopted a scruffy terrier mix from the local shelter. Max was a fellow survivor, learning to trust again. Life was quiet. Then a package arrived. It was a small flat tray box addressed to me in handwriting I recognized immediately. Blake's. My first thought was to throw it in the trash, unopened. What could he possibly say to me? But a deeper, more cautious part of me took over. One that had learned never to underestimate my family's penchant for drama. I brought it inside and set it on my kitchen counter, staring at it like it was a bomb. After about an hour, I carefully cut it open. Inside, there was no sentimental junk, no old photographs. It was only a letter and a hefty stack of paperwork. Held together with a binder clip, I read the letter first. This wasn't an apology. It was a confession born purely of desperate self-preservation. Noah, I know you hate me. I probably deserve it. What happened has completely ruined my life. I can't get a job. Dad and Mom won't even speak to me anymore. They blame me for yelling in court. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Need to clear my conscience, but I also have to protect myself. The DA is still investigating this whole thing, and I don't want to be charged as a co-conspirator. The documents you need to see are enclosed, and they show the entire truth. It was worse than you expected. Blake, my blood ran cold. Worse. How could it possibly get worse? I picked up the stack of documents. These were brokerage account statements. The account was opened in Blake's name during the summer I was supposed to start at Stanford. Then I saw it. The initial deposit, $250,000. I stared at the number, my mind trying to connect the dots. Where did they get that much money? I looked at the date, and suddenly I understood. Stanford's annual tuition room and board costs were projected to be around $62,500 at the time. Multiplied by 4, the total was exactly $250,000. My parents hadn't merely saved the money from my scholarship. That was the story I'd pieced together, the one I assumed was the truth. But the reality was far more sinister. They went to a financial advisor, presented my full-ride scholarship as if it were a grant, and took out a portfolio loan to cover the cost of my 4-year education. They had commercialized my future. They had converted my accomplishment into cash. The statement spelled out the entire horrifying scenario. They transferred that $250,000 to a brokerage account in Blake's name, making him the legal owner and direct accomplice. They used the money as a slush fund. I saw the withdrawals, tuition payments to Blake's private university, a down payment for my father's new car, a vacation in Hawaii. The worst part, which made me literally nauseous, was their investment strategy. They hadn't been conservative. They had invested the money in higher-risk, speculative technology stocks, intending to profit off my stolen future. For a while, it worked, the account grew, then came the crash. I saw the horrific losses, the panic selling, the value evaporating, and more than 80% of the original money was gone, and then everything clicked into place. The lawsuit wasn't solely motivated by vengeance. It was a desperate, insane attempt to recoup their losses. They weren't suing me over money they spent on me. They were suing me for the seed money they had stolen in my name and then gambled away. They believed in their twisted minds that the initial $250,000 was rightfully theirs, and I was the insurance policy to recover it. I dropped the papers on the counter. The room felt like it was spinning. All this time I thought I'd uncovered the truth, but I'd only scratched the surface. This wasn't just about dishonesty and family favoritism. This was intentional, premeditated deceit on a scale I couldn't have predicted. They hadn't simply hidden my dream from me. They sold it to the highest bidder and then lost the money in the casino. Blake's letter wasn't a statement of conscience. It was self-preservation. He was throwing our parents under the bus to protect himself, giving me ammunition to ensure he didn't take the blame. I walked up to the sliding glass door and gazed out at the city lights. I didn't feel angry anymore. That emotion was too small, too simple for this. What I felt was an incredible, chilling clarity, complete understanding of who these people truly were. They weren't just imperfect, selfish parents. They were criminals who saw their own son as nothing more than a financial asset, a bearer, bond to be cashed in. At that moment, any lingering doubt about whether I did the right thing was obliterated forever. I wasn't the one who ruined my family. There wasn't a family to destroy. There was only a criminal enterprise with a shared last name, and I had finally, thankfully, escaped. I've come to realize that peace isn't a destination. It's a peaceful space you create for yourself, one day at a time, especially after discovering that the fight you thought you'd won was only one battle in a much longer, uglier struggle. For me, tranquility is the stillness of an early morning, sitting on my modest balcony with a warm cup of coffee, watching the city slowly come alive. It's the cheerful, rhythmic clicking of Max's nails on the hardwood floor as he comes over to nudge my hand with his favorite squeaky toy. It's the simple, uncomplicated joy of finally living my own life. Do I still think of them? Yes, but things are different now. After receiving Blake's package, the narrative in my mind shifted from tragedy to case study. The rage I felt during the trial has subsided into something else. The cold, hard certainty of an investigator who has finally solved a long, complex case. I no longer grieve for the family I should have had, see them as they are, people whose moral compass was so broken that they saw their son's triumph not as a reason to celebrate, but as an asset to be liquidated. Blake's final revelation was a strange, bitter gift. It completely cauterized the wound. There are no more questions. No more lingering doubts. I understand now. The lawsuit wasn't filed just out of spite. It was a desperate attempt by failed gamblers to have the casino reimburse their losses. I was their final, desperate bet. Light of such a devastating betrayal, I've been forced to redefine what forgiveness means. It's not about absolving them. What they did wasn't simply a lie. It was a crime. It's not about reopening the door to my life. The door isn't just locked. It's been removed, and the doorway has been bricked over. For me, forgiveness has been the act of fully acknowledging the reality. No matter how unpleasant, and then intentionally deciding that their story will no longer be mine. It's about giving up on the idea that they will ever feel remorse, because people like that don't feel guilt for their actions, only for being caught. Forgiveness is about regaining control. Their greed, their desperation, their chaos cannot reach me here. No longer a character in their dark, twisted story. I am the author of my own, and I have chosen to write a story of peace. The other day, I was unpacking the last box from my move. At the bottom, I found a copy of Stanford's notarized affidavit, that single piece of paper that had once served as both my sword and shield. I thought that document held the ultimate truth. For a brief moment, I considered framing it as a trophy for my biggest battle. But then I remembered the brokerage statements Blake had sent me. That was the real truth, the final, ugliest chapter. And I realized I didn't want a wartime trophy on my wall. I didn't want any reminders of the darkness. I looked up at the main wall of my living room. I have a large framed photograph from last month hanging there. It's a picture of Max and me at the top of a hiking trail, looking out over a vast green valley. We're both slightly muddy. The sun is bright, and I am laughing. This isn't the polite, guarded smile from my old family portraits, but a wild, unrestrained laugh of pure, undiluted freedom. I took the affidavit and copies of the brokerage statements. I took them to the shredder in my home office and fed them through one by one. I watched as the truth of their crimes faded into meaningless confetti. The scholarship affidavit described a war I was compelled to fight. The financial statements told the story of a crime that I was fortunate enough to uncover. The photograph on my wall? That is the story of the life I intend to live. Life built without obligation or debt. Not on stolen futures or broken trust, but on loyalty and joy, and a tranquility I've earned one solitary morning at a time. Thank you for hearing my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever learned a truth that was worse than you expected? And how did you find peace afterward? Share your story in the comments section below. I read them all. Don't forget to like and subscribe to avoid missing out on what comes next.